Welcome to the Living Farms podcast, the place where we discuss biodynamic practices worldwide for you, your farm, and the planet. So, welcome to the Living Farms podcast. Today we have Johannes Wirz with us, and he was the co-leader of the section for natural sciences at the Goetheanum. And we will talk about bees today. So welcome, Johannes.
Welcome, thank you.
So to come for the start, how did you come across biodynamic agriculture and why did you decide to do biodynamic beekeeping?
It has something to do with chance or karma. After I finished my PhD thesis at the University of Basel, I got an invitation by Jochen Bockemühl, the former leader of the science section at the Goetheanum. And one of my first projects has been on the Greenland around the Goetheanum. So this is maybe the first time I learned something about biodynamic agriculture. And at the same time, 2 years later, I started a bee project at the Goetheanum. And the story behind is funny. When I arrived, I realized that in spite of 30 years of biodynamic agriculture around the Goetheanum, there were no butterflies and no grasshoppers. So something I believe that should be impossible. And then together with a colleague, we started to study the reasons for this depletion of butterflies and grasshoppers. And the answer was very easy. The meadows around the Goetheanum were all mowed in one time. And the master gardener at the Goetheanum in these days, since there were no cows, had the intention to make a grass compost somehow to mimic what usually the cow does. And in order to do so, they had to cut the grass early in the morning when all insects are still on the ground. And so removing grass and composting this wet grass, or I should say the grass with the morning dew, resulted in the fact that all the insects were composted as well. And so with something that is called staggered mowing, with the intention to have all different developmental stage of a meadow, cut, growing stage, flowering stage, fruiting and seed formation stage, we arrived to make the situation for butterflies much better. And only 3 years after the beginning of this project, there have been 25 species of butterflies, some of them on the red list that had not been there for more than 30 years. It was magic. And even the colleagues at the University of Basel were quite surprised about this rapid improvement. At the same time, in the 90s, we had many discussions with the pioneers of biodynamic beekeeping at the Glasshouse science section. Varroa had come to Europe, we must say, imported by a bee research institute from Germany, when they took over from Asia Apis terrana colonies to make studies. So it was a kind of unintended situation. And Varroa then spread rapidly all over Europe and later to US, etc. And these pioneers wanted to discuss the spiritual background and issues about Varroa. And I don't want to tell the discussions, they were sometimes quite funny. But after this amazing success with butterflies, I believed that this place around the Goetheanum could be a place for honeybees. And I started, together with 2 beekeepers, a project called Keeping Bees Without Chemical Treatment Against Varroa. I didn't know anything about bees. And so the design was such that there were 2 colonies on the Goetheanum ground, 2 colonies somewhere in the village of Dornach, and 2 colonies up at the Gempen. And I had the task to observe, monitor, and document the 2 colonies on the Goetheanum ground. It was a terrible situation for me because I didn't know anything about bees, and I had to open the colonies every 21 days to monitor the population dynamics. And you can imagine 21 days, irrespective of whether there would be a thunderstorm or not. Sometimes my hair was standing up in the air, and I must admit I was afraid of the bees. In the end of the project, and you must imagine 1996 or something like that, he had documented in most cases colony collapse. Even in these early times, there was no way that bees would survive. But in these 4 years of working with bees, I fell in love. This was the reason to become a beekeeper.
Wow, and I mean, this is, I think, a common thing for people that they are afraid of bees, but how did you change your mind, or what fascinated you about the bees?
Well, when I looked at my beekeeper friends, Martin Dettli and Xaver Wirth, they were able to work with bees without protection. This is one thing. The other thing is, despite of my fear, I felt so close to them. And there is this, I cannot say it's kind of a mixture of harmony, beauty, wisdom. And even today, when I visit my bees, I go into a world I cannot exactly describe. It's a world without time. It's a world without space. It's just being connected. And interestingly enough, I lost my fear after some 6 or 7 years of being a beekeeper. And I never forget this moment. It was early spring. The first time I wanted to open my hives. And then I had kind of an imagination. I saw the whole bee season in front of my inner eye. And from then on, something happened. And usually when people ask, where is your beekeeper suit? I say, this is it. I can go there, I would say 98% of all the time without protection and without anything. It's beautiful.
And I mean, you started with biodynamic beekeeping at the beginning then. And I mean, you're now doing several projects with people, and you're quite involved in the beekeeping community, I would say. How was it for you to see how other beekeepers are working? Like, what is the difference between the different working attitudes or perspectives?
Yes, there are major differences, but the first thing I must say, I respect all the beekeepers in the way they care for the bees, be it conventional, be it organic, or be it biodynamic. And I can say a few words about the core differences between biodynamic and conventional beekeeping. And what I say actually goes back to the bee lectures of Steiner. Rudolf Steiner gave them in the year 1923. So just after the first Goetheanum had been burnt down by a maniac. And there he started these lectures because among these mostly non-anthroposophical workers, there was a beekeeper. And he wanted to know what Steiner would think about artificial queen breeding. And the pioneers of biodynamic beekeeping started to somehow extract out of these lectures the basic principles of this biodynamic beekeeping, and only 1995, if I remember correctly, there were the standards there for biodynamic beekeeping. And the standards say we are allowed to multiply the colonies only when it shows that it wants to swarm. First point. So one could say it's kind of a restriction because you can only do it from early May to mid of June. Nobody or not many people in conventional beekeeping do it like that because they want to replace their queens latest at the age of 2 years. This is one aspect. The second aspect is that they don't like brood cycle interruption. And of course, when a colony is swarming for all the new units that are developing, there is a shorter or longer time where the colony has no brood. As a result, the load of brood diseases, and Varroa, for instance, is a brood disease, but also foul brood or American or European foul broods, the load goes way down. So what seems to be a disadvantage, because you have this brood stop and these are not collecting honey in these days, is on the other hand an advantage because, and I believe it is the most important hygienic behavior, they reduce pathogen and disease load. Okay. The second thing they could extract or found in the bee lectures is that Steiner was talking about the combs as a skeleton of the colony. And it's quite clear, if the colony is the organism, it should be able to develop its bones on itself. And from there, the standards today say it is mandatory that on the combs where the brood nest is developing, it must be built by natural combs. Again, the disadvantage of this procedure is that you first lose 6 to 10 kilograms of honey that are needed to construct 1 square meter of combs, let's say. And the second thing somehow conventional beekeepers criticize is that we have more drone cells in our colonies than in the conventional ones. Okay. But the advantage is such. First, the load with pesticide residues in natural combs is always lower than in beekeeping systems where you are working with foundations, and even more if you work with a so-called closed wax cycle. This means the beekeepers takes out old combs, they are melted, and afterwards they make the foundations out of it. And you can see that all pesticides, fungicides, and herbicides that are fat soluble will be found in the combs, in the wax. And interestingly enough, and I could not believe it, an expert at the University of Hohenheim has told me that even today, in systems with a closed wax cycle, you can detect DDT. And DDT has been prohibited in the early of the 70s last century. So you can learn one lesson: pesticides and all these so-called plant protection substances have a very, very long shelf life, we could say. And second, it can accumulate if you are always using the same wax. So this is has been shown quite often that the amount of these pesticides in our wax is much lower than many conventional wax. The second thing is that drones per se are not are part of the whole organism, and I believe that good colonies, strong colonies, make good drones that could eventually be propagated into, or by queen mating, propagated into other colonies. And interestingly enough, the more drones you have in a colony, the less likely it is that the colony wants to swarm. The details for that are not that important, but this is also for beekeepers that don't like to have too many swarm could be an advantage. And then the third aspect, also extracted from the bee lectures, has been that the queen of a colony is not the boss of the colony, but the heart. The queen is the one that holds together all these sometimes 35,000 bees. And replacing queen by artificial means is like heart transplantation surgery. So this was the reason no artificial queen breeding. And again, some beekeepers say disadvantage, because if you do not breed queens the artificial way, you cannot control with what drones they mate at these drone congregation places in the region. And they say you lose good properties, you lose good characters. On the other hand, and this is the advantage of this, and the third disadvantage, I must say, is that, of course, if you make this natural mating, allow this for natural mating, then you may eventually lose the race or subspecies specific properties. Because in these drone congregation places, we will find the drones from all the beekeepers. And when I look into my colonies, I see whether there has been a guy who is working with the black bee, the original subspecies in Europe, whether he has been working with the Italian bee, or whether he has been working with the buckfast bee. So you lose these different subspecies by natural mating. On the other hand, if you look now at the advantages, it is clear that the more drones, different drones, can mate with a queen, the healthier, the more resilient, etc., is the colony. This has been shown, proven many, many times, no question. The second aspect is that mating locally means you get an adaptation of the colony to the specific place. And again, there are many, many studies that have shown that locally adapted colonies are better than colonies that have queens that are not locally adapted in terms of vitality, resilience, dancing, dynamics, flight range, and even foraging activities. So you see, it is kind of a question, where do you put your weight and where are you ready to take some disadvantages into account? And to lose the race for me is, or the subspecies status for me is less dramatic compared to local adaptation. And the last thing that then I will stop with these standards, but the last thing they extracted from the bee lectures, if you want to see the colony as a whole, you should make sure that the brood nest is not interrupted by wood or whatsoever. So you should take care about the unity of the brood nest. And as a consequence, there are certain hiving systems in Europe and the US that are for sure not suited for biodynamic beekeeping. But beside that, you can do biodynamic beekeeping in every possible hiving system. So what I want to say is there are two different philosophies, and I would say the one is closer to the needs of the colony, the other one is further away. And the loss of honey brood interruption, etc., is a consequence I really can carry along or come along with.
Yeah, thank you so much, Johannes. There are some things which are really resonating with me. Because, for example, also this picture of the bee queen being the heart of the overall hive is something which like I don't have that experience as you have with beekeeping, but I had the chance to have some experience. And when I first started, we got some bees which had some queens which had cutted wings, and for me this was really like it was really something which was irritating me, but it came out of this idea to prevent that the queen is swarming. And for me, it looked so sad when I saw this. And I think for me, the biodynamic beekeeping is, as you said, more close to the needs of the hive and of the animal, instead of focusing on the needs of the farmer or the beekeeper, so to say. And that's sometimes challenging because not everybody has the time or to prioritize the bees instead of their own time. So how do you manage like that the swarms can naturally swarm, and how do you manage this with your time schedules?
Well, I must admit that in the standards, the best thing you can do is let your colony swarm. But you are allowed, when you see that a colony wants to swarm, to take out the swarm. This means the old queen with maybe some 15,000 bees before they have been swarming out. So you can make a kind of an artificial swarm with the old queen. And then you are also allowed to divide these remaining bees into different units to make new colonies. And when we make in our bee courses, we tell the participants that if they somehow take the swarm out 3 days before the first queen cell is capped, then you do it in the moment where the old colony is in dissolution. Because in these last 3 days, we know from studies, first, the queen is fed with more sugarless protein. So the queen will reduce the ovaries, become less lighter, less heavy. And in contrast, the worker bees, they get heavier because they are filling their honey stomach with honey. And 80% of all the bees in a colony ready to swarm start to activate the wax gland. So you see that the colony itself knows something will happen. And this is the moment where we are allowed to take the swarm with the old queen and make new colonies. By the way, in the bee lecture, Steiner spoke, as I said, combs are the skeleton, the queen is the heart, and swarming process is a moment of near death of the old colony. And for me, it was for a long time a bit irritating, because the few times I've seen flying a swarm out, it was joy and happiness. Yeah. But sometimes then a beekeeper can start to reflect, what does this mean that a so-called death process could be joy and happiness? And then we would go deeper into something. And when I don't want to elaborate too much on that, but for me it is very clear. Death belongs to life. There's no life. The second thing is, I'm convinced that humans or others in a moment of birth are dying in a kind of a world and having birth in a new one. And in the end of the life, the death here means a birth in another place. So this is not how should I say, an absolute beginning and a total end. These are moments of transition. And maybe we somehow can grasp a little bit of this moment of transition with respect to the bees, that is not only sorrow, but is also joy.
It's interesting because when they're swarming, they're also so quiet in a way. I mean, they're not at all aggressive but they're like really inwardly oriented and have this very interesting calmness. And I think that's also something which you can transport sometimes if you work as a beekeeper. It's something you talked at the beginning about getting stinged by the bees, but you reduce this rate if you are calm by yourself, or like if you try to meditate beforehand, or like settle yourself, so to say. So how do you prepare yourself before getting interacted with the bees?
Well, there is this, I would say, this constitutive part after more than 20 years of beekeeping. I don't have to do a lot of exercise to calm down, because I know that if I'm in a hurry, if I'm stressed, the first thing a colony feels, the bees are feeling, is the stress of the beekeeper. That's quite sure. But when I start to work with the bee, with a very short ritual to not only think what I'm doing as a beekeeper, but somehow to remind what bees maybe are in a larger context. And I say a few words that flew to me like bees are flying to me. And these words I can tell them because I think it is nice. It starts, you are related to the sun, and you are akin. I start again. You are born out of the sun. You are akin or related to man. I admire your beauty. I admire your wisdom. And I'm grateful that I can work with you, live with you, learn from you. And then I start to smoke and things go on.
Wow.
And for me, I sometimes believe that we should at many instances in our everyday life, have this moment of, I call it, ritualization of work. Because although it's for sure not quantifiable, the quality of the result of your work changes if you do it with love or respect, or if you do it in under stress, or even with a bad mood and feeling.
And it's so interesting that the bee courses that are existing, or they're always fully booked, because the people, I think they're really looking for getting to come into these rituals and come into relationship with nature. Or how would you say, what are the reasons for this big interest in beekeeping?
Yeah, I think you are right. And 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, we had our own bee course at the Goetheanum with some 23 people. And then it was already day, so we had ample time to discuss. And we asked the question, why do you want to work or to live with bees? And honey or wax or pollen or whatsoever was not the main topic. People said, I feel peace. I feel harmony. I enter into a world of timelessness. I learn to be very careful and mindful when I'm working with the bees. So all of a sudden you had the impression everybody wanted to be with bees for reasons of inner health or inner harmony or inner qualities. And I think that's really something that is attracting is attracting people. And in our course, of course, we say it's very nice to get some honey sometimes. We know that we get a lot of wax because we are replacing old combs every time. But the main thing is this deep connectedness with the bees. And if we look from a more, how should I say, ecological perspective, honey is one part, but the most important part of bees and all pollinators is pollination. And then, of course, the next step when we are working with bees is the question, how must the surrounding look like in order to fulfill the needs of the bees, not only for a short time or period in the springtime or in the summertime is honeydew from the forest, etc., etc. And we learn that this being connected, we see so deeply, and that affects us so deeply when we look at the comb, is also realized outside there in this connection and interactions of bees and flowers.
So what could people do to support and learn about bees, and how could they come into this connection with the bees?
Well, the one thing is that we can openly discuss it and share these moments when we felt connected or moments where we are disconnected, to ask, how do you feel? We are making exercises to go a little bit deeper into this realm where we do not only observe and judge, but also learn to feel. And then, of course, as soon as you start to work with bees, be it that we take out the comb, sometimes the participants take out, you are really in this world. And it's amazing that you can look at the comb for 20 or 30 minutes, and from the outside, somebody would say total stress, being there, no excited or agitated bees, this peace, this harmony, perfect. And that's what they take home. And we had once a very nice word in the last course of a seminar where a young woman said, I want to learn something about bees, but I have learned something for my life. Yeah, and then I think it cannot be better than that.
And I totally believe that if you are together as a human being, so to say, that if you happen to be at peace with yourself, this reflects on the environment around you, and not just on the people, but also on the natural environment. So,
yeah. It is for sure the case.
Yeah.
And of course, when you have the opportunity to work with in a seminar from March to October, then you are not obliged. You see how is the year going on. And all of a sudden, they realize that the flower situation is so poor that in some years we have to start feeding May or June. And then all of a sudden you realize that what you see here is kind of a mirror what is out there in your surrounding. And the surrounding of a colony is amazingly large. 3 kilometers radius or 6 kilometers diameter comes to some 30 square kilometers for one colony. I must tell you, I don't know how it looks like 3 kilometers away from my bees. But if there's nothing coming in, you really see something goes wrong.
So we should start spreading those seed bombs. I don't know if you know them, those like balls where you have a lot of like flower seeds in it, and whenever you take a walk, you just drop them on the different places.
It is a very nice thing to do, but this is of course not the solution.
Yeah.
If everybody would do it, or everybody would start in her garden, or his or her garden, or even on a balcony to plant bee-friendly plants, it could help. But to work in a really sustainable and, how should I say, future way, we need a change in agriculture. This is for sure. But as long as we can substitute honey by sugar, if you don't want to look at, you don't see it. And of course, I have some colleagues that are, how do you call it, putting bees where the flowers are. So you start close to oilseed rape, then you go to chestnut, then you go to linden tree, and you can earn amazing amount of honey. And then very clearly, when the season is over, maybe in July, you start to feed sugar. But what we would need is a continuous nectar flow from early spring to late summer or early autumn.
And I think, again, the bees are not just there for the honey, but they have such an important role in the overall organism of the landscape or the earth even. And you're probably better with the numbers, but I read, like, if the bees would be completely eradicated, we would just have like 1/4 of the food that we have in the supermarkets now, because they also pollinate, I mean, a lot of our food. And it's if they get away and if they die as they are currently dying, then our food supply will be drastically diminished in the future.
This is for sure. The diversity of fruits, berries, vegetables would be amazingly small without pollination. But for me, the honeybee is maybe the bee that has the best life in these days. And we should know that beside the honeybee we love, there are some 450 to 500 species of solitary bees. There are, of course, bumblebees, wasps, etc. And in an environment that is not in a good shape, they cannot survive. So I always say the bees are, so to speak, the lens through which you can somehow judge the situation for all pollinators. And if it's fine for the bees, it is very likely fine for all the different pollinators. And I think it is how should I say, a wrong thing to play with solitary bees and honeybees as competitors. Of course, if there are too many hives around, this may be a situation. But most of the time, in the beginning of this kind, the so-called competition, is lack of flower. And flowers are lacking because the way we are doing agriculture, because all the surfaces we need for building and construction, etc.
So that's a perfect beginning for the ending, so to say, because at the end of the podcast I ask each guest what his or her 3 main reasons are to continue work in biodynamic agriculture, and in your case in biodynamic beekeeping. So what keeps you alive about biodynamic beekeeping to continue this work despite the sometimes incredibly devastating situation that we have in the environment?
It's we are asked these questions very often, because there are people who say responsibility would mean to withdraw from beekeeping. I say, as long as more than 95% of all the beekeepers do it the conventional way, it is very nice to have a small group that shows that other ways are possible. And as you have said before, the way we are working with the bees has impacts on our way looking outside, observing nature, and also has impact on our, I should say, how should I say, capability to see dignity, to see harmony, etc., through nature. And I'm pretty sure that these are soft qualities we need to change or transform the world or the beekeeping. And I strongly believe, like with all the banks that are crashing this moment, there will be a point or a time where this whole conventional food system or even beekeeping system will crash. And I'm deeply convinced that biodynamic agriculture and biodynamic beekeeping is not the solution for everything, but shows towards the solution for everything. And I would just like to recall the first thing with respect to pollinators in agriculture. I think it has been the 7th lecture in the course for farmers, where Steiner is talking about these nature-intimate cross-interactions. And for me, this is the ecological lecture. And it's amazing to see that he says, if you look to the farm as a whole, you should have all the organs that belong to the farm. And from wetlands to Magerrasen, what is it in English?
Yes, meadows with low diversity. So, oh no, it's not low diversity, but like, nutrients.
And the more diverse things are, and the more in balance they are, the better for the whole. And irrespective of what is said about biodynamic agriculture and preparations, we know that a good practice is increasing the resource the farms are using, the soil. And when Paul Mather, now 20 years ago, in this prestigious journal Science, has reported the first report on this DOK project, comparison of dynamic, organic, and conventional agriculture, a reviewer has said this is kind of the 8th wonder of the world. That you are using a resource and you are not depleting it, but you are making more. And for sure, this is the way to go. If we are talking now on a global scale, because if we are just using up all this resource soil, well, I don't know how long we can do it with agricultural things like that. And the second thing that is also connected and very important, so we could say the first thing is improving soils means doing something for the climate. And the second thing, asking what does farm organism needs in order to be healthy and resilient. This is a question of diversity. So I think both aspects are fulfilled by good biodynamic farming or production systems. And in such an organism, the bees, be it the honeybees or all the solitary bees, will not only have a security to survive, but will help to develop and evolve the whole world of the plants and flowers. Mm-hmm. And this is, for me, so to speak, the bar vision of after the crash or omitting or going around the crash. And of course, I know many people now start to argue about, can we feed the world by organic or biodynamic agriculture? But for me, the core question is, how do we want to feed the world? And if we change the house from what is done today, crazy for everybody.
Well, thank you so much, Johannes. I will link a lot of references that you gave me beforehand in the show notes, and linked so for those people that are interested in reading further, learning more about beekeeping and biodynamics, they can read it up there. And as you said, you're also doing the beekeeping courses, so that's also something which can be done for those people interested to dive more into the topic. And yeah, thank you so much for this interview, and just keep up the great work you're doing.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
And see all of you soon.